Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 6 waiver wire targets for the 2025 fantasy football season, as I'll be talking about players at a variety of different positions, the best available tight end, quarterback, running back, wide receivers, kickers, and defenses for not only Week 6, as many of us are dealing with a plethora of injuries, but also the upcoming bye weeks. Hopefully, these players are not only going to provide value this week, but for the remainder of the season as sustainable options for our fantasy teams. So I'll begin by talking about the tight end position, considering how much success the position found in Week 5, and hopefully these six contenders that I'm going to be mentioning to begin with can continue their value. Now, before I get into talking about these players on an individual basis, if you're looking for my thoughts on a specific player, be sure to travel down to the description of the video. We have timestamps available down below. While you're down there, if you have not yet already, of course, subscribe to the channel, as I'm making daily fantasy content for the entirety of the season. Besides waiver wire rankings videos, all that kind of jazz, I of course live stream on the channel later tonight after the Monday Night Football game. If you have any questions, be sure to swing on by. I'm more than happy to help. Also, while you're down in the description, be sure to check out Betr. For those of you who are potentially trying to get on the action for tonight's game between the Jacksonville Jaguars and Kansas City Chiefs, sign up using code Andrew today. Make that first time deposit minimum of 10. Then all you have to do is play $1 within a real cash play, picking more or less on two-player statistics. Not only will you get the free $10 from signing up, but you'll get my rankings sent for my email directly to yours every single Sunday morning for the remainder of the season. These rankings are by position, by tier, half PPR, full PPR, and includes flex to help you set your lineups. So for those of you looking to take advantage of the opportunity, of course, check out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility based on your current location. And of course, good luck in tonight's contest. Thank you very much for all the support. Okay, let's go ahead and begin by talking about the tight end position for Week 6, beginning with Mason Taylor. As of right now, only rostered in 20% of sleeper formats, and the breakout finally hit. Over the course of the last couple weeks, he has had gradual opportunity share increase, going from 6 to 7 targets, and in this most recent week against the Dallas Cowboys, 12 total targets, an incredible breakout performance in which he was able to accumulate 9 receptions, 67 receiving yards on those 12 target opportunities, which led to 13.2 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format. He's coming off of back-to-back games of a 26% target share within this offense, and in this most recent contest against the Cowboys, out-targeted Garrett Wilson, the number 1 receiving option of the New York Jets offense. These are all incredibly promising statistics that over the course of the remainder of the season, Mason Taylor is going to establish himself as not only a top 16 tight end option, but hopefully a top 12 for the remainder of the season as a rookie breakout candidate. Over the course of Justin Fields' career, specifically if we look back to the 2022 and 2023 seasons when he was a starting quarterback of the Chicago Bears, he was able to help Cole Kmet be the number 7 overall tight end in back-to-back seasons for fantasy purposes in a half PPR. So why not Mason Taylor this year? Of course, he's finding himself targets, receptions, receiving yards. Eventually, those receiving touchdowns will accumulate in his score lines. Thank you very much. All right, continuing on. Let's talk about Brenton Strange, a player that is playing later tonight and I know has a very high rostership percentage, currently on sleeper 57%. But if you have an opportunity of picking him up, first and foremost, because of the fact that he is currently the number 1 receiving option within the Jaguars offense in terms of total receptions and receiving yards thus far this season, but he plays tonight. So if someone is sitting on your bench that you're not satisfied with their performance and you have an opportunity of picking him up for next week, I think this is an incredibly valuable pickup, not only because of what he has done thus far this season, but because in Week 6, they're taking on the Seattle Seahawks. The Seahawks matchup is the number 1 matchup at the tight end position thus far this season, as they have allowed the following statistics to opposing tight ends. Of course, K. Dotton yesterday, 4 catches for 81. Hadn't done anything all season long, but once he takes on Seattle, huge performance. McBride, 7 for 52. New Orleans tight ends combined for 8 catches, 72 and a touchdown. Pittsburgh tight ends, 8 catches for 64. San Francisco tight ends, back in Week 1, 8 catches, 44 and 2 touchdowns. Brenton Strange would be in line for a fantastic performance this upcoming week in Week 6 against the Seattle Seahawks. Number 3, we have Theo Johnson of the New York Giants, currently only rostered in 10% of leagues, but coming off of an incredible performance of 7 targets, 6 catches, 33 and 2 touchdowns for 18.3 fantasy points. This is back-to-back weeks with a receiving touchdown minimum. He has caught all of Jackson Dart's career touchdowns thus far, and when they get down into the red zone, of course, the opportunity share of him getting touches continues to grow, especially considering we just most recently saw Darius Slayton in the 4th quarter of this game leave with a hamstring injury. This provides even more value for someone like Theo Johnson, who can continue to contest for opportunities within the receiving game. I understand that this week they take on the Philadelphia Eagles, but the Denver tight ends in this most recent week combined for 5 catches, 44 and a touchdown. So why not Theo Johnson within the upcoming matchup as the number 1 receiving threat of this offense for Jackson Dart? Number 4 is AJ Barner, who has scored a receiving touchdown minimum in 3 of the last 4 games. When they get down into the red zone, they are looking in the direction of AJ Barner as he is finding himself open or running over defenders to find himself in the end zone. Nonetheless, coming off of a week of 7 targets, 7 catches, 53 and 2 touchdowns for over 20 fantasy points and a half PPR, and has an opportunity of taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars, who've given up their fair share of fantasy points to opposing tight ends thus far this season. Of course, tonight's game against the Kansas City Chiefs, we're not aware as to what Travis Kelce's done against the Jacksonville Jaguars as of the recording of this video, but when we're talking about San Francisco the week before, 5 catches, 78 and a touchdown from their tight ends. Houston 5 for 39, Cincinnati 7 for 53. There's a lot of potential for AJ Barner to get himself receiving workload, but also once they get down into the red zone, of course, get even more exposure to opportunity. Now, speaking of exposure to opportunity, Jake Tonges, in the absence of George Kittle, Ricky Pearsall, and of course, Juwan Jennings in this most recent game, 11 targets, 7 catches, 41, and an early touchdown for 13.6 fantasy points. We got word earlier last week in which George Kittle is not expected to return until potentially week 7 or 8. So in the event in which we're going to continue to see someone like George Kittle miss time, there's an opportunity to pick up a player of this caliber who's currently only rostered in 8% of leagues. And if for another consecutive week, Ricky Pearsall and Juwan Jennings are going to miss, Mac Jones is going to be under center, Kendrick Bourne is going to be out wide, Jake Tonges absolutely should be implicated for another consecutive game of finding success, as of course he has done it for the last couple weeks as the primary number 1 tight end of this offense. The final player I wanted to mention at the tight end position is Michael Mayer, primarily because Brock Bowers did not play in week 5 either. I understand that Michael Mayer didn't play either, but that was primarily because of the concussion protocol. And once he clears the protocol, Brock Bowers, who is currently week to week, according to Pete Carroll, is not trending in the right direction considering the knee injury, which is a PCL strain and additionally a bone bruise in his knee. Again, in the absence of Brock Bowers, this offense is very much so predicated on getting the ball to the tight end position. That's how they're built. There's a reason in week 5, even in the absence of Bowers and Mayer, we saw the tight ends of the Las Vegas Raiders combined for 9 targets, 8 catches, 56 yards, primarily with Albert Okwuegbunam being the primary receiving option. So if Michael Mayer is going to be the primary tight end going up against Tennessee this week, I'm firing him up as a potential option for those of you who are in desperate need of tight end. All right, let's continue on by talking about some quarterbacks for this week. Of course, we saw Sam Darnold, another one of our hidden gems, fire up and find himself incredible volumes of success. An 82% passing completion percentage, 341 passing yards, 4 passing touchdowns, yes, and an unfortunate interception to close out the game off of the helmet of a defensive lineman. Otherwise, wouldn't have been an interception. 27.6 fantasy points. Again, an incredible performance. Now, going into this upcoming week, taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars, of course, we're going to have to wait and see, but Jacksonville's been pretty stout in terms of stopping the run. And even though Seattle wants to heavily run the ball with Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet, who both found success in this most recent game, if in fact push comes to shove and they're forced to throw the ball, he's of course proven for another consecutive year that he can distribute the ball to a variety of different targets and find fantasy success. So currently only rostered in 37% of sleeper leagues, a fantastic pickup and play for those of you who are in need of some successful options at the quarterback position. Again, for those of you who had an opportunity of picking up Jackson Dart and Matthew Stafford last week and did so, I looked at their rostership percentages. Both of them were over 57%, therefore wasn't willing to suggest them, as the assumption was that they should already be on roster. The next player I wanted to mention is Mac Jones. In the event in which Brock Purdy is given another week off, Mac Jones is coming off of an unstoppable performance in which he was able to take on an elite defense, put up 342 and 2 touchdowns against them, all while his number 1 and 2 receivers, Juwan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall, were out. So in the event in which they come back and, of course, help provide more value to Mac Jones, it's going to continue to elevate his potential for upside, especially considering they're taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who, of course, Sam Darnold, like I just mentioned moments ago, threw for an 82% passing completion percentage, 341 yards, and 4 passing touchdowns. So why not Mac Jones within an upcoming high-scoring contest against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers secondary? The next player I wanted to mention is Bryce Young, the final quarterback for this week. If in fact you are in a desperate situation, if injuries are plaguing you, if you're missing Lamar Jackson and you're not looking to settle with someone like a Jake Browning or a Tua Tagovailoa, you can look towards the direction of a Bryce Young, who takes on the Dallas Cowboys, the best matchup at the quarterback conversation this week, primarily because everybody has found success against them on the ground, through the air. Again, this is a defense that has struggled mightily, and as long as their secondary continues to struggle, even with Bryce Young not playing the greatest football, it doesn't really matter. As long as you're taking on the Dallas Cowboys, it's an advantageous enough matchup to make you fantasy relevant within this situation. All right, let's move on to the running back conversation. But before I do, I just wanted to go ahead and throw up these 6 players and just want to kind of give you a reminder that these players should have already been rostered going into weeks 5 and the upcoming contests. I had all 6 of these running backs ranked within the top 36 of the Sunday morning live stream. And that should have potentially kind of notified you, hey, maybe we should be picking up these players, especially like Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt should not be available in a league. 75% rostered. Nick Chubb, 72%. Michael Carter, 59%. Rachaad White, 81%. Rico Dowdle, 71%. And Amari DeMercado, 61%. All these players should already have been rostered in your league for this most recent week's contest. So if in fact they are somehow still available, do yourself the favor and pick them up, because again, they should not be available. But again, maybe if you play in a smaller league, I can understand that. All right, let's go ahead and let's move on to our top 6 running backs, beginning with our number 1, Kenneth Gainwell. He had a bye week in this most recent week. And of course, that may have forced people in your league, including yourself, to ignore him, as he wasn't able to potentially help you in week 5. Therefore, you may have not looked in his direction. But we have to remember, in week 4, against the Minnesota Vikings, 19 carries for 99 and 2 touchdowns, 6 receptions on 6 targets, 35 yards, and 28.4 fantasy points. We cannot ignore the efficiency, and we cannot ignore the potential, which even with Jalen Warren coming back, if in fact he does this week, there should be a two-headed monster approach from Pittsburgh for the remainder of the season based on just how well Kenneth Gainwell performed in the most recent contest. So going into this week, even if Jalen Warren does return, I think Kenneth Gainwell has kind of carved out enough of a role within this backfield to be fantasy relevant at a top 36 capacity, especially considering all of the injuries and bye weeks that are to come. The next player I wanted to mention is Hassan Haskins. Again, currently rostered in only 2% of leagues and not by accident. Omarion Hampton is the only reason why Hassan Haskins is being mentioned here, as Hampton unfortunately went down with an ankle injury and did not return to the game. And it was said that he was in a walking boot after the game. So if in fact another running back will be having to step up this week to fill into the shoes of Omarion Hampton, remember that the Los Angeles Chargers running backs thus far this season, weeks 1 through 5, are averaging 18 attempts per game, 5.4 targets per game, and 16.3 fantasy points per game in a half PPR scoring format. Now, the question is, why am I so confident in Hassan Haskins in comparison to someone like Kamani Vidal? Well, from what we saw yesterday, Hassan Haskins had 2 touches prior to Hampton even getting injured. And immediately after Omarion Hampton going down with injury, Hassan Haskins proceeded to play 8 of the next 9 snaps in the absence of Omarion Hampton. And in the final drive of the game, when we did see Trey Lance in the game as a starting quarterback, of course, once they had pulled Justin Herbert, they're like, all right, this game's over. Kamani Vidal then took over the running back conversation. So Hassan Haskins is the starter in the absence of Omarion Hampton. Now, there could be a conversation in which this backfield turns into a committee situation, but as of right now, I do believe that Hassan Haskins would be the priority pickup. And in the event in which the injury to someone like Omarion Hampton is far more serious than initially expected, there is a possibility that the Chargers could go out and sign Gus Edwards to a contract and bring him in, as of course he is very much so familiar with this offense and played with them last season. Number 3 is Tyler Allgeier, another one of these players coming off of a bye week in the event in which he was dropped and or ignored and not, prioritized within the waiver pickups. Remember that in week 2 and in week 4, he had 16 attempts for 76 and a rushing touchdown, and then 16 attempts, 51 and a touchdown. 14.5 and 11.1 fantasy points in 2 of the last 3 games. 3 games this season thus far of his 4 consisting of 10 or more rushing attempts. That's a kind of volume of opportunity that can't be ignored, on top of the fact that he is one of the most premier handcuffs behind Bijan Robinson. So he has so much value. The fact that he's currently rostered in only 35% of leagues is an incredible shock. It's a run-first offense, and with upcoming injuries and bye weeks, he should be rostered, especially this week as they take on the Bills, who are allowing 17.08 fantasy points per game on the ground alone, rushing statistics to opposing running backs this season thus far. Number 4 is Kendre Miller. Kendre's overall opportunity share continues to increase. He played a season-high 26 total snaps and played a season-high 39% of the offensive snaps. He outcarried Alvin Kamara 10-8, and that is an incredibly shocking fact. Now, going into this week, now that the transition has begun in the last 2 weeks of his opportunity share and his effectiveness, it looks like there's a possibility in which this team is transitioning away from Alvin Kamara and maybe even looking to trade Alvin Kamara in the not-so-distant future, as he is, of course, a running back that has incredible value for a contender, but unfortunately not for the New Orleans Saints, as they haven't utilized him at an elite capacity and haven't really been able to get him a lot of looks down in the red zone to at least find fantasy success. Therefore, Kendre Miller should be prioritized as we proceed. The next running back I wanted to mention is someone that you can pick up before tonight's game. We have Brashard Smith, of course, the offensive coordinator of the Kansas City Chiefs. This most recent week said that they want to get him as many opportunities as possible going forward. If that's going to be the case, there's a possibility with efficiency that he could win the job away from Pacheco and Kareem Hunt, who have not looked great thus far this season. Another player in tonight's game is Bhayshul Tuten. Of course, he is primarily the handcuff to Travis Etienne, but there are many of rookie running backs thus far this season that have broken out. So why not Bhayshul Tuten in a game in which maybe he is given opportunity, could end up breaking out. But again, outside of that, a primary handcuff and or lottery ticket as we proceed. All right, let's proceed to the wide receiver conversation. I want to first and foremost mention if players like Romeo Doubs, Calvin Ridley, or Rashid Shaheed were dropped in your league and are not rostered. As of right now, Romeo Doubs 62%, Calvin Ridley 71%, Rashid Shaheed 67% on Sleeper. If they are not already rostered, please do yourself the favor and pick them up because incredible value can be found with those receivers. But let's go ahead and let's talk about some other receivers. I'm not too excited about the wide receivers over the course of today's waiver wire kind of potential options, as a lot of the names I've either mentioned before or they may not have as much sustainable value for the remainder of the season. But we begin with Darnell Mooney, currently rostered in 41% of sleeper leagues. Coming off of a bye week, he may have been dropped because of the injury he sustained in week 4. Again, a hamstring injury, but we have been reported as of earlier this morning that he is unlikely to miss any time. And it was a perfect time to get a hamstring injury as he had week 5 off with a bye week. Therefore, going into this upcoming contest against Buffalo, potentially in a negative game script, expects for a lot of passing for Michael Penix, potentially in the direction of someone like Darnell Mooney. Then we have Tory Horton, the rookie wide receiver, who has scored a receiving touchdown in 3 of the last 4 games. Very much so like an AJ Bourne, this offense continues to find success. And as long as you continue to, pull vital targets down in the red zone, of course, there is value to be had there. Who knows? Maybe Tory Horton could end up having a season in which he scores 8 to 10 receiving touchdowns as a rookie and becomes a Calvin Ridley-esque rookie season performer. All it would take is someone like, Cooper Kupp to miss a little bit of time, and Tory Horton could very easily get himself into the conversation. Again, as long as Darnold has built the rapport with him, the offensive coordinator has said thus far this season that he reminds him of Justin Jefferson, there's a lot of potential going forward. Then we have Kendrick Bourne, who is very much so reliant on Jennings and Pearsall missing another consecutive game, and of course, Mac Jones being the starting quarterback. Of course, he's coming off a week of 11 targets, 10 catches, 142 in that Thursday contest against the Rams. So even though this week they do take on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who again are great in terms of run-stop efforts, there's a possibility in which they could allow a lot of passing statistics just in the same way in which JSN, Tory Horton, AJ Bourne, Cooper Kupp were able to accomplish against them in the event in which, of course, all their receiving options for the 49ers are out for another consecutive game. Number 4, we have Jalen Coker. Again, I've mentioned him for the last 5 consecutive weeks because I truly do believe once he's active and ready to go, he's going to be a huge part of this offense. He's currently been activated for the 21-day practice window that has been opened up by Dave Canales in the event in which he is available for this upcoming week to play. What better week than taking on the Dallas Cowboys, the best matchup at the wide receiver position? Then we move on to the Dallas Cowboys wide receiver, Ryan Flournoy. Now, again, this is a wide receiver that I don't expect to have sustainable value for the long term, as Kevontae Turpin and CeeDee Lamb should be expected to return in about 2 weeks. Jalen Tolbert coming off of a game in which he had 1 target. Additionally, George Pickens found himself success. Pickens and Ferguson are completely, on a different level than Flournoy. Now, in the event in which Jalen Tolbert is not going to continue to get himself a lovable target share. Obviously, Flournoy coming off of 9 targets, 6 catches, 114, an incredible second half. But if Turpin and Lamb are going to be out, and this is going to be the next man to step up for the Dallas Cowboys offense, why not pick him up and potentially play him in a deeper league? Isaiah Bond is the final player I wanted to mention. Coming off of a week of 8 targets, that is enough for me to be convinced that he should continue to get opportunities to sit on my bench and potentially build rapport with Dillon Gabriel for the future of the season for this offense. Again, if he can continue to get himself targets, that is one of the most valuable positions that you can be in for a rookie wide receiver that is only going to continue to expand and grow as a player. All right, let's move on to the final conversation where we'll talk about kickers and defenses. We begin with one of the kickers that, of course, has been one of the best in the National Football League year over year in terms of accuracy. He's number 1 amongst all kickers thus far this season in terms of fantasy points per game. That's Eddie Pinheiro of the San Francisco 49ers. Again, pick him up. He's currently only rostered in 3% of sleeper leagues. Number 1 amongst all kickers in fantasy points per game. Then we have number 2. Brandon McManus, only rostered in 7% of leagues. He has scored 9 or more fantasy points in 3 of the last 4 games. Same thing with someone like Joey Slide, 7% rostered and has scored 9+ points in 4 of the last 5 games. Again, even though he is missing kicks, this team continues to have to rely upon field goals, and this week taking on the Raiders should be a fantastic opportunity. Then we have the Green Bay Packers, who may have been dropped in your league, and if in fact that was the case, they take on the Bengals this week. The Bengals have given up 10 fantasy points in each of the last 3 games to opposing defenses, so pick them up and play them against the Bengals, regardless of who's playing quarterback for the Bengals because, again, Joe Burrow is not showing up in pads this week. Then we have the New England Patriots taking on the New Orleans Saints. Again, the Patriots defense have put up 8+ fantasy points in 3 of the last 4 games, and the New Orleans Saints offense can be taken advantage of, especially considering how Mike Vrabel's defense has continued to get all their pieces back. Christian Gonzalez is back, and they're looking great. Of course, with a huge victory last night against the Bills. Then we have the final defense, the Los Angeles Rams. Yes, they are rostered in 52% of leagues. If somebody drops them in your league, they're taking on Baltimore with Cooper Rush and or Snoop Huntley. So whichever way they go about it, again, the Baltimore Ravens have given up 8, 8, and 11 fantasy points to opposing defenses in the last 3 weeks. So if you have an opportunity of picking up the Rams and firing them up against the Baltimore Ravens without Lamar Jackson, it's a fantastic opportunity to find success for fantasy purposes. All right, that's going to cover for me today. The final thing I wanted to mention, again, for those of you who are trying to get my rankings every Thursday and Sunday, of course, get your fantasy football questions answered in regards to waiver wire, potential trade questions, all that kind of jazz. And of course, get the exclusive Patreon-only Discord server access. Be sure to go ahead, check out the Patreon down below in the description. Again, be sure to check out Betr for tonight's game. I'm thinking BTJ more than 2.5 receptions. I'm also thinking if I can find Juju Smith-Schuster with 1.5 receptions, I think that'll be a pretty solid position to roll with tonight. But outside of that, thank you everybody for watching. I'll be back later tonight with a live stream. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.